Chapter 1. The Gathering at Blackwood Hall. The long drive up to Blackwood Hall curved gently between leafless oaks, the fading November light filtering down in wan streaks across the gravel. A chill wind rattled the branches, as though nature itself conspired to lend the house an air of secrecy. To Captain Hastings, seated beside Lady Margaret Chalmers in her open motor, the mansion appeared every inch the ancestral stronghold. Grey stone, ivy clinging stubbornly to its facade, and windows like watchful eyes. "I warn you, Captain Hastings," Lady Margaret said with a faint smile, her white scarf fluttering in the wind. "The Chalmers family can be a rather dramatic company. My cousin Eleanor delights in scandal, while poor Sir Reginald will insist upon dragging us all into politics at the dinner table." Hastings chuckled, though inwardly he experienced a certain anticipation. He had accompanied Lady Margaret on this weekend gathering as her guest, a promise of pleasant society, perhaps even a little romance of the subdued country house sort. Yet something in her tone, half amused and half weary, suggested that all might not be so tranquil beneath the polished surface. As they reached the great portico, a butler in sombre livery emerged, his expression carved in the dignified lines of long service. "Welcome to Blackwood Hall, my lady." His eyes flickered to Hastings with the slightest curiosity, before returning to neutral composure. Inside, the hall opened wide with oak beams and a roaring fire already kindled. Around it, the first of the assembled party stood in scattered knots of conversation. Lady Margaret swept Hastings through the introductions with the easy grace of one accustomed to society. There was Sir Reginald Chalmers, the host, ruddy-cheeked, thick in body and in manner, with a booming laugh that never quite reached his watchful eyes. His wife, Lady Eleanor, proved to be as sharp as her cousin had described, her beauty tinged with a certain restless dissatisfaction. A glance, a gesture, suggested that she thrived upon secrets, whether her own or others. Next was Dr. Jonathan Miles, a family friend and physician, whose spectacles flashed in the firelight as he greeted Hastings with a measured handshake. His voice, low and deliberate, carried a faint note of melancholy, as though accustomed to confidences never shared. At the periphery of the group lingered Miss Violet Green, Sir Reginald's secretary. A young woman of modest appearance, she nevertheless bore herself with a nervous intensity, her eyes darting quickly about as though each word spoken might conceal hidden meaning. Finally, Lady Margaret guided Hastings toward a tall figure by the window, Mr. Edward Harcourt, a barrister of some repute. His smile was courteous yet cool, his keen gaze suggestive of a man who weighed others constantly against some inner scale of judgment. The atmosphere of the gathering was outwardly cordial, yet Hastings could not help but detect subtle threads of tension weaving through the drawing-room. A too loud laugh from Sir Reginald, a quick tightening of Lady Eleanor's hand upon her glass, the sharp intake of breath when Dr. Miles asked after Harcourt's recent case in London. All were small things, yet together they formed a pattern, as though some invisible storm lay just beyond the horizon. Dinner was a grand affair, conducted with the traditional formality of old houses and old families. Silver gleamed, candles flickered, and servants moved with the quiet efficiency of shadows. The conversation, as Lady Margaret had forewarned, soon turned to politics, with Sir Reginald declaiming on matters of empire, while Harcourt's thin smile betrayed an inner amusement. It was during the second course that the first true crack appeared in the genteel facade. Lady Eleanor, her eyes bright, leaned forward and said in a voice carrying more than it ought, "You speak with great authority, Reginald, but one wonders whether authority is always quite deserved. After all, some secrets, once spoken, can ruin even the proudest of houses." The silence that followed was sharp, broken only by the clatter of a dropped fork. Sir Reginald's face flushed darkly, and Hastings, who was unused to such family scenes, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. It was Lady Margaret who with quick wit changed the subject, drawing Eleanor into some trivial remark about the latest play in London. Yet Hastings could not forget the words, nor the charged glance exchanged between Eleanor and Harcourt across the table. Later, in the library, the party dispersed into smaller groups. Sir Reginald dozed in an armchair with brandy in hand. Dr. Miles and Miss Green conversed quietly in a corner, and Eleanor played a restless game of patience, her movements sharp, her lips pressed tight. Hastings was about to remark upon the curious atmosphere when the door opened and a familiar, distinctive figure entered the room. Small, precise, immaculate, with moustaches as faultlessly arranged as his attire, Monsieur Hercule Poirot. "Mes amis," he declared, bowing slightly, "I beg your pardon for intruding. My train from London was delayed, and I fear I arrive unfashionably late. But I could not resist the kind invitation of Lady Margaret to spend the weekend at Blackwood Hall. Perhaps, even, I shall have the opportunity to rest my little grey cells." If Hastings had entertained any doubt that this weekend might prove extraordinary, it was instantly dispelled. For wherever Hercule Poirot walked, trouble, and its solution, was seldom far behind. Chapter 2. The Shadow of Death. The morning at Blackwood Hall dawned grey and oppressive, the mist rolling low across the lawns as if the earth itself sought to veil what it knew would come. Captain Hastings rose early, compelled by a sense of unease he could not quite name. From his window he saw Sir Reginald striding across the gravel path toward the stables, his broad figure outlined against the dim light, while Lady Eleanor, still in her dressing gown, stood at an upper balcony, her gaze fixed coldly upon him. Downstairs the household had already begun its slow stirrings. The clink of china and the faint aroma of coffee drifted from the breakfast room. Hastings descended to find Miss Violet Green already at the long table, nibbling nervously at a slice of toast, her fingers twitching at the edges of a sheaf of papers she clearly meant to hide. She started visibly when Hastings wished her good morning. "Sir Reginald insists upon dictation at the oddest hours," she said quickly, colour rising in her cheeks. "I was merely setting a few notes in order." Before Hastings could inquire further, "Doctor?" Miles entered, his expression sombre. He looked pale, as though some weight pressed heavily upon him, but he merely greeted them both with a nod and reached for the coffee. His hands trembled slightly as he poured. The household assembled piecemeal, Lady Eleanor sweeping in with an elegance that seemed almost theatrical, Harcourt in crisp morning attire, his eyes alert and calculating. Sir Reginald returned last, smelling of horses and cold air, his manner loud, jovial, and curiously strained. It was Poirot, however, who seemed least perturbed by the tense undercurrents. Immaculate as ever, he surveyed the room with quiet amusement, his gaze flickering keenly from face to face as though he absorbed more than was spoken. "Ah, mon ami Hastings," he said as they sat together. "You observe perhaps that already the atmosphere here is like the gathering clouds before the storm. One feels, how do you say?" The electricity in the air. Hastings could only nod. To him the morning seemed curiously heavy, though he chided himself for allowing Poirot's manner to infect his imagination. The day passed in small diversions, a walk upon the grounds, a short drive to the nearby village. Yet beneath every activity lay an odd restlessness, as though each member of the party carried a private burden. Eleanor grew sharp in her remarks. Violet Green dropped her pen 3 times during an afternoon of dictation, and Doctor. Miles lingered continually in the background, his brow furrowed as though caught in perpetual thought. It was near evening, just before dinner, that the storm broke. Hastings had been dressing in his room when a sudden piercing cry echoed through the corridors, a cry of terror and finality. He rushed out to find Lady Margaret at the top of the stairs, her hand clasped to her mouth, eyes wide. "Downstairs? In the study," she gasped. They hurried together, others converging upon the scene. The heavy door of the study stood half open, and within, by the great desk, lay Sir Reginald Chalmers. His massive frame sprawled unnaturally across the carpet, his face contorted, one arm outstretched as though in appeal. Beside him, a dark stain spread rapidly across the Persian rug. For a moment no one spoke. Lady Eleanor swayed and clutched the doorframe, her expression one of mingled horror and, was it triumph? Harcourt muttered an oath beneath his breath. Miss Green shrank back, her papers fluttering to the ground. Dr. Miles hurried forward and knelt by the body, his hand pressing to the throat, then dropping heavily. He looked up, his voice low and grave. "He is dead." A gunshot to the chest. Poirot, who had entered silently behind Hastings, did not move at first. He merely regarded the scene with narrowed eyes, his head cocked to one side, his hands neatly folded before him. Then, with exquisite calm, he stepped forward, bent over the body, and surveyed the desk, the pistol lying upon it, the scattered papers, the broken glass at the carpet's edge. "Mon Dieu," he said softly. "So it begins." The servants crowded the hall, the butler pale, a footman trembling. Lady Margaret clung to Hastings' arm, whispering broken phrases of disbelief. Lady Eleanor, recovering herself, declared sharply that the police must be summoned at once. "Yes, madame," Poirot replied gently. "The police will be called. But first, it is most necessary that no one leaves this house. Until the truth is known, we are all of us prisoners of Blackwood Hall." Chapter 3. The Arrival of the Law. The study had become a chamber of whispers and tense silence. The servants, pale and restless, clustered at the far end of the corridor, while the family and guests remained within, as though bound by invisible chains to the grim tableau of Sir Reginald's lifeless form. Poirot, small and precise, moved with quiet deliberation around the room, his keen eyes drinking in every detail. Inspector Graves arrived from the nearby market town just as dusk deepened into night. A tall, broad man with a manner as solid as his boots. He stepped into the hall with a brisk authority that contrasted sharply with the frozen stillness of the household. Behind him, a constable carried a leather satchel and looked nervously about, as if fearful that death itself might seep from the panelled walls. "Right then," Graves said, removing his hat and nodding curtly to Lady Eleanor. "I understand there's been a shooting." He was led into the study, where he paused, his eyes narrowing at the sight before him. Sir Reginald Chalmers. Shot in his own house. Devilish business. He turned to the group. "No one leaves until I've taken your statements." Poirot inclined his head courteously. "Monsieur l'Inspecteur, you will forgive me if I have already preserved the scene as best as possible. Nothing has been touched since the discovery." Graves glanced at him, recognition dawning. "Monsieur Poirot? Well, this is a stroke of fortune, though I dare say you'll find we in the yard are capable enough." His tone carried the faintest edge, the natural pride of an English policeman faced with the reputation of a foreign genius. Poirot only smiled. "Mais naturellement. Yet perhaps my little grey cells may be of some modest assistance." The inspector began his formalities. The pistol, lying upon the desk, was examined first. Hastings, standing nearby, noted with interest how Poirot bent close, not so much at the weapon itself, but at the scatter of papers beside it. A small corner of a letter protruded from beneath Sir Reginald's heavy arm, the edge torn as though hastily seized. Poirot's fingers hovered, but he refrained from touching it, merely raising his brows in delicate curiosity. Statements were taken one by one. Lady Eleanor, her voice icy but steady, declared that she had been in her room when the shot was fired. She claimed to have heard nothing until the outcry drew her forth. Inspector Graves regarded her narrowly, but she met his gaze with hauteur. Edward Harcourt, the barrister, insisted he had been in the library, consulting a volume of legal history. "I was alone," he admitted, "but that does not make me a murderer." His cool eyes betrayed no flicker of unease, yet Hastings felt a distinct reserve in the man's words, as though he measured each syllable before uttering it. Miss Violet Green trembled visibly as she spoke, her hands twisting in her lap. She had been in the small office adjoining her own chambers, preparing some notes for the morrow. Her eyes filled with sudden tears. "Sir Reginald was not always kind," she whispered, "but I would never wish him dead." Dr. Miles, steady but grave, explained that he had been writing letters in his room. He admitted hearing what he thought was a door slammed somewhere in the house, but no shot. His expression as he gazed upon the body was one of professional sorrow, though Hastings fancied there was something withheld, some deeper emotion carefully masked. Lastly, Lady Margaret confirmed that she had been returning from the music room when the dreadful cry echoed through the hall. It was she who had first glimpsed the body, and her shock still trembled in her voice. Inspector Graves turned to Poirot at length. "Well, monsieur, you've heard them. A collection of neat little alibis, some more convenient than others. What do you make of it?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "I make of it, monsieur, that the truth does not always shout from the rooftops. Sometimes it whispers in the smallest of details." He crossed once more to the desk, gesturing delicately toward the broken glass lying on the rug. "Observe. The glass is shattered near Sir Reginald's hand, yet there is no scent of brandy upon his lips, and the pistol, it lies with too great neatness, as though posed for the stage." He tapped his temple lightly. "It tells me a story, but not yet the whole one." Graves grunted, unimpressed. All the same, it seems to me a case of suicide cannot be ruled out. Sir Reginald was a proud man from what I hear. Debt, scandal, political trouble, any might have driven him. Poirot gave a gentle laugh. Non, mon ami. Suicide, it is too imperfect. A man such as Sir Reginald does not arrange his death in this manner. There is vanity in him, yes, but not this form of despair. No, we have murder here, cold and deliberate. His gaze swept across the assembled faces, pausing ever so slightly on each, until the silence in the room deepened with unease. And until the little grey cells have spoken clearly, he added softly, we must consider that every one of us is capable of having pulled the trigger. Chapter 4. The First Questions. The household gathered in the drawing-room after the inspector's departure to telephone the authorities in the village. The fire crackled warmly, yet no comfort softened the tension that clung to the air. Each face lit by the wavering glow bore its own mask of grief, of indignation, of fear. Poirot stood a little apart, his hands folded neatly, his head tilted as though listening to a melody only he could hear. At length he spoke, his voice calm, almost conversational. Messieurs et mesdames, it is often in the first hours after a crime that truth slips most easily through the cracks. If you will permit me, I should like to ask some small questions. They may appear trivial, but you will forgive me. I am most fond of the detail. Hastings, ever loyal, produced a notebook and poised his pencil. He began with Lady Eleanor, who reclined on the settee with an elegance that did not conceal the steel in her eyes. Madame, Poirot said, bowing slightly, you will forgive me, but I must ask, your words at dinner last night. You spoke of secrets which could ruin even the proudest of houses. Was that merely a jest, or had you something particular in mind? A faint smile curved her lips. I confess, Monsieur Poirot, my tongue ran ahead of my discretion. Reginald was a difficult husband. He had enemies. He had debts. I meant nothing by it, save perhaps to sting his vanity. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Ah, vanity. It is often more delicate than glass. Yet you say you meant nothing. Très bien. But tell me, did Sir Reginald fear you? Did he confide in you? Her eyes flashed. He confided nothing. He trusted no one. Poirot inclined his head and turned next to Edward Harcourt. Monsieur, you are a man of the law. Perhaps you will permit me a question of logic. If a letter were written, hastily torn, and found half concealed beneath the arm of a dead man, what might one infer? Harcourt's expression did not flicker, though a faint tightness drew at the corners of his mouth. That depends on the letter. A confession, perhaps? Or a blackmail note? Either way it would be evidence. Just so, murmured Poirot, his eyes gleaming. Miss Violet Green was next. She sat with her hands clenched tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the carpet. Mademoiselle, Poirot said gently, you were devoted to your employer, yes, and yet you admit he was not always kind. Tell me, did you fear him? Her breath caught. He had a temper. He could be cruel with his words, but I did my duty. I needed the position. And this morning, when Captain Hastings greeted you, you hid papers quickly. Were those notes from Sir Reginald? She flushed deeply. They were merely drafts. Nothing of importance. Eh bien, Poirot said softly. We shall see. Finally he approached Doctor Miles, who sat with folded arms, his gaze brooding. You are the man of science, Doctor. You tell us death came from a gunshot to the chest, but you also said you heard only a door slammed. Is that not curious? Miles frowned. Perhaps the report was muffled. The house is old, sounds carry strangely. Or perhaps I was distracted. Perhaps, Poirot murmured. But I, who am fond of order, find it odd that the human ear mistakes a pistol for a slammed door. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the ticking of the mantel clock. Poirot stepped back, surveying them all. You see, mes amis, he said at last. Already the little grey cells begin to stir. Each of you has told me something of interest. Each of you has shown me a fragment of truth, and from fragments, one may build the whole picture. But for the present, let us rest. Tomorrow we shall look more closely at this study, and at the secrets it holds. He bowed slightly, then withdrew, leaving behind him a roomful of faces turned inward with private fears. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. Morning sunlight filtered weakly through the mullioned windows of Blackwood Hall, laying long stripes across the breakfast table. The air was thick with unease. The scrape of cutlery and the clink of cups seemed unnaturally loud. Conversation was sparse, broken only by perfunctory remarks about the weather or the lateness of the post. Poirot, immaculate as ever, sipped his chocolate and surveyed the company with an air of mild detachment. Hastings, seated beside him, found it difficult to swallow a mouthful of bacon, for every glance exchanged across the table carried suspicion. It was Inspector Graves who broke the silence. Having returned early with reinforcements from the village constabulary, he cleared his throat. "I've made inquiries," he announced, and it seemed Sir Reginald had been in deep financial trouble. Debts mounting, land mortgaged, investments failed. There's even talk of shady political dealings that might have come to light. To my mind, there's our motive. Lady Eleanor gave a short laugh, sharp as glass. If you imagine Reginald shot himself to escape his creditors, you knew him not at all. He was too stubborn for that, too proud. Perhaps, Graves said evenly, but pride does not pay debts. A man backed into a corner may do desperate things. He looked meaningfully at Poirot. I still say suicide remains the likeliest. Explanation. Poirot's eyes twinkled, though his voice remained calm. And yet, mon cher inspecteur, does a man who shoots himself leave the weapon upon the desk so neatly arranged? Does he break a glass, yet leave no liquor upon his lips? None. The details, they betray us. Suicide would be too simple, too neat. No, this is murder. Of that, I have no doubt. The inspector's jaw tightened, but he made no reply. The morning was given over to a formal search of the study. Drawers were opened, papers examined, cupboards unlocked. It was there that the first red herring revealed itself. From beneath a stack of correspondence, the constable produced an envelope marked in bold hand. To Sir Reginald. Urgent. Private within was a short note, unsigned, written in a hurried scrawl. Pay what you owe, or all shall be revealed. A murmur ran through the group as the note was read aloud. Miss Green gave a startled cry, while Harcourt's eyes narrowed to slits. There, Inspector Graves declared triumphantly. Blackmail, clear as day. Sir Reginald, unable to pay, chose instead to end it all. Poirot shook his head gently. You leap, mon ami, before you walk. This letter. Yes, it speaks of money. But is it not curious? It is unsigned. It is vague. It may even be forged. We cannot yet say. But observe. The torn scrap I noticed yesterday beneath the body. That, I think, will prove more telling than this melodramatic threat. He bent to examine the fragment once more, now carefully lifted by tweezers. The ink, though smeared with blood, bore two discernible words. Midnight confession. Hastings leaned closer. Midnight confession? What the deuce does that mean? Poirot's moustaches quivered. Ah, mon ami, that is what we must discover. Throughout the day, suspicion shifted. Harcourt, with his calm detachment and legal mind, seemed all too convenient a villain. Eleanor, with her sharp tongue and veiled remarks, inspired whispers among the servants. Even poor Miss Green, whose hands shook as she attempted to write out Sir Reginald's final dictations from memory, fell under a shadow. At luncheon, a new revelation unsettled them further. Dr. Miles, after much hesitation, admitted that Sir Reginald had consulted him privately a fortnight earlier. He believed, Miles said reluctantly, that someone in the household was betraying him. He did not name who, but he spoke of evidence, something he intended to reveal soon. He asked me whether such strain might damage his health. I told him it might. The words hung in the air like smoke. Inspector Graves muttered, More reason to think the man snapped. Secrets, blackmail, betrayal, enough to break any fellow. But Poirot only tapped the side of his head, or enough to drive another to silence him. That evening, as the lamps were lit and shadows deepened across the great hall, Poirot gathered Hastings aside. His voice was low, almost confidential. You see, mon ami, how the threads are laid before us? A blackmail note, an unsigned threat, a confession promised at midnight, and a man who feared betrayal within his own walls. These things, they do not align with suicide. They point outward, not inward. He straightened a candlestick with fastidious precision, then added softly, But beware, Hastings. We are surrounded by red herrings. It is the nature of the murderer to weave them thick, We must be patient. The truth, it hides, but it cannot remain hidden forever. Chapter 6. The Clue in Detail. The following morning brought with it a peculiar stillness, as though the house itself held its breath. The mist had lifted from the lawns, leaving behind a pale sunlight that seemed too fragile for the grimness of the hours past. Hastings joined Poirot in the study, where the detective already busied himself with the smallest of observations. "Regard Hastings," Poirot said, pointing delicately with his cane at the carpet near the desk. "You see nothing, perhaps?" "But I see a question." Hastings bent low. "Only the broken glass, Poirot." "Just so. But look closer. The fragments are many, yet all are gathered near the rug, not scattered wide. That tells us something. The glass did not fall by accident. No, it was smashed deliberately to give the illusion of violence. A careless staging, mon ami." He moved next to the desk. The pistol remained under police seal, but Poirot's eyes lingered not on the weapon but on the blotter. With a swift gesture, he lifted it slightly. The faint outline of words, pressed through from a sheet no longer there, revealed themselves under the light. Hastings leaned in, astonished. "By Jove, it's writing! Can you make it out?" Poirot smiled faintly. "A portion only. It says, 'At midnight, the truth shall be,' and then it fades. But already you see it joins with a scrap of paper we discovered, 'Midnight Confession.' There was to be a declaration, something of import, revealed last night." Hastings frowned. "And someone silenced him first." "Exactement. A confession, mes amis, is most inconvenient to the guilty." Their investigation was interrupted by Inspector Graves, who entered with his usual heaviness of step. "I've news," he declared. "We've traced that blackmail note. The paper comes from a local stationer, cheap sort, but the handwriting matches none of the household." Poirot inclined his head. "Interesting, but perhaps too obvious. A forger, Inspector, may disguise his hand. But more, did you note, Hastings, that the ink upon the torn scrap under Sir Reginald was darker than that of the blackmail note? Fresh ink, recent writing. One letter, real, the other perhaps a blind." The inspector harumphed, unimpressed, and began questioning the household once more. Lady Eleanor was summoned first. She arrived in a silk gown of pale green, her manner haughty. "I am growing weary of these interrogations, Inspector. If you imagine I had reason to shoot my husband, you are gravely mistaken. His death relieves me of nothing but inconvenience," Poirot intervened gently. "Madam, last night, before dinner, did you see your husband?" She hesitated only an instant. "Briefly, in the corridor. He appeared distracted, but I thought nothing of it." "Distracted, yes," Poirot murmured. He had perhaps prepared himself for his confession. Next came Harcourt. The barrister's cool composure never wavered. "I repeat, I was in the library." "I heard nothing until the commotion began." Poirot leaned forward. "Monsieur, do you believe in coincidence?" Harcourt's lip curled faintly. "In law, we are taught to distrust it." "Bien. Then it is not coincidence that Sir Reginald hinted of scandal, and you, a barrister of reputation, were his guest. Tell me, had he sought your counsel?" Harcourt paused, then said, "He had mentioned a legal matter, yes, but it was trivial." "Trivial?" Poirot murmured, his eyes glittering. "I wonder." Miss Violet Green was pale and trembling when called. She wrung her hands until Hastings feared she would bruise her own fingers. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said softly, "when Sir Reginald dictated to you, did he ever mention the word confession?" Her eyes darted up, then away. "Yes, only once. He said he was preparing something important, something that must be kept secret until it was complete. He warned me never to speak of it. I thought it a speech for Parliament." Poirot regarded her steadily. "And yet you feared him," tears welled. He could be cruel." "But I swear, Monsieur Poirot, I had nothing to do with this. I only copied what he told me." Poirot bowed his head gently. "Merci, mademoiselle. That will suffice for now. The final witness was Dr. Miles." He stood with hands clasped behind his back, his voice controlled. "If you suspect me, you waste your time. I was his friend. I tended his health." Poirot looked up sharply. "Ah, but you forget, Doctor. You told us you heard a door slam, not a shot. Yet a pistol in a panelled room makes a most particular sound. To confuse the two is most strange." Miles stiffened. Perhaps I was mistaken. Doctors are not infallible, Poirot's gaze lingered. No, but they are accustomed to truth, n'est-ce pas? When the interviews concluded, Poirot paced the study in silence, his hands behind his back. Hastings waited, impatient. At last Poirot stopped, his eyes shining. The detail, Hastings. It is always the detail. The broken glass, the half-written confession, the sound that was, or was not, heard. Each speaks of a hand that sought to deceive. We are surrounded by lies, but the truth, it peeps through the cracks, and soon it shall stand revealed. Chapter 7. More Lies. Surface. By late afternoon, the corridors of Blackwood Hall had grown heavy with suspicion. The guests no longer mingled freely. They kept to corners, watching one another with wary eyes, speaking in whispers that ceased whenever a door opened. Even the servants, usually as discreet as shadows, carried about their duties with nervous glances. Poirot moved among them all with an air of serene courtesy, yet Hastings knew well that behind the polite bow, the quiet smile, the immaculately arranged moustaches, his friend's mind was working ceaselessly. Every look, every slip of the tongue, was weighed upon those famous little grey cells. That evening Inspector Graves summoned the household once more to the drawing-room, determined to shake loose further testimony. The great chandelier glimmered above, though its light did nothing to dispel the chill of unease. "Someone here," the inspector declared bluntly, "knows more than they've said. A man is dead, and until the guilty party comes forward, we must assume each of you has something to hide." The word struck home with almost theatrical effect. Lady Eleanor sat very still, her pale fingers twisting her handkerchief. Harcourt's jaw clenched as though against an inner battle. Miss Green looked on the verge of collapse, and Doctor. Miles stared grimly into the fire. Poirot, however, raised a hand with quiet dignity. "Allow me, Inspector. The English method, it presses too hard. One must not hammer upon the shell, but warm it. Then the cracks appear." He turned his gaze to Lady Eleanor. "Madame, you are most composed. Yet it is clear your marriage was, how shall I say, less than happy. Did you perhaps seek affection elsewhere?" Her eyes flashed. "Monsieur Poirot, that is an impertinence." "Perhaps." But sometimes the impertinent question uncovers the truth. Poirot's voice was soft, almost coaxing. For a moment she hesitated, then her lips tightened. "Very well. If you must know, yes, I was fond of another. But it was not sordid, not shameful. I sought companionship, that is all." Her gaze flickered across the room, to Harcourt, who had stiffened visibly. A murmur ran through the company. Harcourt, after a long pause, spoke curtly. "Lady Eleanor exaggerates. She was indiscreet, perhaps, in her attentions, but there was nothing between us." "Nothing?" Eleanor's laugh was brittle. "You're quick to deny what suited you well enough at the time." Hastings felt the temperature of the room drop, the bitterness in Eleanor's tone cutting deeper than any knife. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Voila, another layer peeled away. Affection, perhaps rejected, perhaps reciprocated, but certainly it complicates our picture. He moved on, fixing his gaze now upon Violet Green. "And you, mademoiselle? What of you? You have the look of one pursued by ghosts. What truth do you fear?" Her composure broke. Tears spilled as she clasped her hands desperately. I saw Sir Reginald the night before he died. He was in his study, writing feverishly. He told me that at midnight he would read aloud his confession, that all would be known, and that he would expose a traitor in this house." The room stirred with shock. "Why did you not tell us this before?" Inspector Graves demanded. "I was afraid," she cried, "afraid it would look as though I had a hand in it. He had grown suspicious of me too. He accused me of stealing letters, though I swear I never did." Poirot stepped closer, his tone gentler now. So, there was to be a revelation at midnight. And someone in this room, feared that revelation too greatly. His gaze swung to Doctor Miles. The physician shifted uncomfortably. "And you, Doctor?" "You have the air of one who carries a burden." Miles's face hardened. "If you must know, Sir Reginald had confided in me that he was being blackmailed. He suspected more than one of this company. He asked my counsel on whether to confront them outright." Hastings started. "So the note was genuine?" "I believe so," Miles said grimly, though who wrote it I cannot say." Poirot nodded slowly, as though a piece of the puzzle had slipped neatly into place. "So, mes amis, now the tapestry grows richer. We have blackmail. We have love, or what passes for it. We have fear and secrecy, and the promise of a confession that never came. Each of you has lied, whether by silence or by speech, but lies they cannot endure. The truth, it waits." He stepped back, his eyes shining in the lamplight. "Already, I begin to see its outline. Soon, it will be plain to all. Chapter 8. The emotional turning point. The following night descended heavily over Blackwood Hall. The wind rattled the shutters and the lamps burned with a wavering glow, as though the house itself protested the secrets it contained. Dinner was a quiet, uneasy affair. No one lingered at the table, and soon the party dispersed into the drawing-room where Poirot, calm as a chess master, took his customary seat near the fire. Hastings noted the change in his friend's manner. Poirot was no longer merely observing. His eyes, sharp and restless, flicked from face to face with a deliberate intensity, like a man setting pieces into their final position. At last he cleared his throat delicately. "Mes amis, I should like us to speak frankly, if you please. One grows weary of the lies. If Sir Reginald truly intended to reveal his midnight confession, then surely one of you knew what that confession would contain." His words fell like stones into a pond, sending ripples across the assembled company. Lady Eleanor rose swiftly, her silk gown rustling. "If you mean to imply, Monsieur Poirot, that I feared his words, you are wrong. Reginald's every secret was bluster and bravado. He threatened often, but he rarely acted." Poirot's voice was soft. "Yet you had much to lose if he exposed a liaison. N'est-ce pas?" Her face flushed scarlet. "You presume too much." She turned sharply to Harcourt, her voice trembling with both rage and something deeper. "Tell them, Edward. Tell them the truth of us." All eyes turned. Harcourt, who had sat rigid and pale, closed his eyes for a moment before speaking. "Very well. Yes, Eleanor and I cared for each other, more than was proper. But it was no sordid affair, not yet. Reginald suspected, and he warned me he would ruin me in the courts, disgrace me before the bar. That was his confession, I'm sure. A cruel scheme to destroy us both." A gasp escaped Violet Green's lips. She pressed her hands to her face. "So it was you he meant?" "No," Eleanor snapped bitterly. "He meant me. He meant to humiliate me before them all." Her voice cracked, and for the first time Hastings saw not the proud society lady, but a woman pushed to the edge of desperation. Poirot inclined his head gravely. "So, at last we have the truth of the heart, and yet it is not enough." He turned suddenly to Violet Green. "Mademoiselle, it is you who tremble most. I think you know more than you have confessed." Her tears spilled freely now. "I cannot bear it." Yes, I saw who entered the study last night just before the shot was fired. I was too frightened to speak. I feared they would accuse me if I told, but I saw it with my own eyes." The room froze. Poirot leaned forward, every muscle intent. "Who, mademoiselle? Who was it?" She sobbed, her voice breaking. "It was Doctor—" "Miles." The physician sprang to his feet, his face livid. "Lies! Utter lies!" Poirot raised his hand for silence. "Calm yourself, Doctor. Anger does not serve you well. Mademoiselle, are you certain?" "Yes," she whispered. "I saw him slip inside. And then, the shot. I swear it." The air in the room seemed to shudder with the weight of her words. Graves muttered an oath, already reaching for his notebook. Lady Eleanor's eyes blazed with a strange mixture of triumph and fear. Harcourt's jaw tightened, while Miles stood rigid, his hands clenched. Poirot alone remained tranquil. He regarded Violet with a long, searching look, and then turned to Miles. "So, it seems the net draws tighter. But remember, mes amis, appearances may deceive. A lie may wear the mask of truth, and truth may wear the mask of a lie. We must tread with caution. Still tonight, the heart of the matter beats louder, and soon it will break. Chapter 9. The Trap. The following evening, Hercule Poirot requested that the household gather in the great library. The fire burned brightly, casting long shadows across the shelves of leather-bound volumes. A tension gripped the company, fear, anticipation, and resentment intermingled, for everyone sensed that the little Belgian detective was preparing to act. They took their places reluctantly. Lady Eleanor, pale but defiant, seated, herself with arms crossed. Harcourt stood stiffly at the mantel, one hand gripping the edge as though for balance. Miss Green sat trembling at the edge of a chair, her eyes darting nervously toward Doctor. Miles, who himself appeared composed only by sheer force of will. Lady Margaret, silent and anxious, kept close to Hastings, while Inspector Graves looked on grimly from the corner, notebook in hand. Poirot rose with slow dignity. He surveyed them one by one, his head tilted ever so slightly, his moustaches gleaming in the lamplight. When he spoke, his voice was calm, almost gentle. Mesdames et messieurs, we have danced long enough around the shadows. It is time to step into the light. Sir Reginald Chalmers was murdered. Of that there can be no doubt. But what remains is the question of who had reason, and who had the courage, to fire the shot. A murmur ran through the room. Poirot raised a finger. Let us consider the matter step by step. Sir Reginald had promised a midnight confession. He had written words to that effect, half finished upon his blotter, and a fragment remained beneath his arm. Such a confession, mes amis, is never harmless. It is dynamite, a weapon more powerful than any pistol. He turned to Lady Eleanor. You feared disgrace, a wife exposed before society as unfaithful, your position, your reputation, gone. Her lips tightened, but she said nothing. Poirot moved to Harcourt. And you, Monsieur le Barrister, to be named as the lover of your client's wife, ruined at the bar, dishonoured in the courts. For you too the confession was fatal. Harcourt's hand gripped the mantle more tightly, his face unreadable. Poirot shifted his gaze to Violet Green. Mademoiselle, you were accused of theft. If Sir Reginald spoke such a charge aloud, your livelihood, your good name, would vanish. Is it not so? Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded faintly. And you, Doctor? Poirot's voice softened, but the words cut keenly. You alone admitted that Sir Reginald confided in you. He spoke of betrayal, of blackmail, of secrets soon to be revealed. If his confession named you, your reputation, your practice, destroyed. Miles flushed, his composure cracking. I tell you, I was his friend. Perhaps, Poirot's eyes gleamed. Or perhaps you were his betrayer. The room trembled with the weight of his accusation. Graves half rose from his chair, but Poirot lifted a hand. Patience, Inspector. For tonight, I shall do what I often do. I shall set a little trap. One of you knows precisely what Sir Reginald intended to confess. One of you feared those words enough to silence him. And I say this. The guilty party will betray themselves, not by what they confess, but by what they deny. He paused, letting the silence stretch taut. Then, in a voice clear and deliberate, he said, Sir Reginald was prepared to reveal that he had discovered the identity of the blackmailer. The one who had been sending him threatening notes for weeks. That blackmailer, mes amis, is here among us. The effect was instantaneous. Lady Eleanor gasped audibly. Harcourt's eyes narrowed to slits. Violet covered her face with her hands, but it was Doctor. Miles, who leapt to his feet, his face white. That is a lie, he shouted. He never knew who it was. He told me so himself. A deadly silence followed. Poirot's gaze sharpened like a blade. Ah, Doctor, and how could you know what he told others, unless you feared precisely this, that he would expose you? Miles' breath came ragged. No, Poirot bowed slightly. Merci, Doctor. The trap, it has sprung. The library erupted. Lady Eleanor crying out in shock, Harcourt's voice rising in protest, Violet sobbing uncontrollably. But Poirot remained calm, immaculate, his eyes gleaming with certainty. Tomorrow, mes amis, he said, I shall lay before you the truth in full. Every detail, every step, every motive. Tonight, we have seen enough. The mask has slipped, and the murderer stands revealed. Chapter 10, the reveal. The following evening, as dusk deepened into night, Hercule Poirot summoned the entire household once more to the library. The great chamber was heavy with silence, broken only by the rustle of the curtains in the draught and the faint tick of the mantel clock. The atmosphere was electric, as though every man and woman present knew that the hour of truth had arrived. Poirot stood before the fire, his hands folded neatly, his moustaches gleaming like a pair of scimitars in the lamplight. Hastings sat nearby, pencil poised, though his mind raced faster than his pen could follow. Inspector Graves, resolute, leaned against the doorframe watching with stern eyes. Poirot began softly, his voice calm, deliberate. "Mes amis, murder is never merely the act of pulling a trigger. It is a story, a chain of motives, fears, and desperate choices. Last night, Sir Reginald Chalmers was slain not by chance, nor by some anonymous hand, but by one of you, driven by fear of his promised confession." His gaze swept across the room, resting briefly on each face. "We know Sir Reginald was to speak at midnight. We know he had written the words, 'Midnight Confession,' and we know too that he had discovered his blackmailer." Lady Eleanor shifted uneasily, her pale hands clasped tightly. Poirot's eyes lingered upon her. "You, madame, feared exposure of your indiscretion. But though your husband might have wished to shame you, humiliation is not a mortal crime. You had cause, yes, but not the desperation of a murderer." He turned to Harcourt. "And you, monsieur, faced ruin at the bar. A grave motive indeed. Yet I observed you throughout, calm, logical, resigned. You feared scandal, but your nature is one that fights in court, not with a pistol. You would have faced Sir Reginald in law, not in murder." Harcourt inclined his head stiffly but said nothing. Poirot looked then to Violet Green. "Mademoiselle, you are timid, frightened, yet loyal. Your tears, your trembling, they are not the mask of guilt, but of fear. A young woman accused falsely does not shatter a glass to feign suicide." "No, you are innocent." Violet sobbed softly, relief mingling with exhaustion. At last Poirot's gaze fell upon Doctor Miles. His voice sharpened. "And so we come to you, Doctor. You alone admitted that Sir Reginald confided in you. You alone claimed to have heard a door slam, not a gunshot, a most curious mistake for one familiar with such sounds. And last night, when I spoke of the blackmailer being known, it was you who cried out that Sir Reginald never knew, betraying knowledge you could not possibly possess unless you were the very man he intended to expose." Miles' face blanched, his composure crumbling. Poirot pressed on, relentless. "The blackmail notes, Doctor, were written by you. Sir Reginald's political dealings gave you opportunity, his secrets gave you leverage. You bled him for money to cover your own debts, your own indiscretions. But when he resolved to reveal all, you panicked. You entered the study under cover of evening, shot him at close range, and sought to disguise it as suicide. You broke the glass, you arranged the pistol. But the details betrayed you." Poirot raised a finger, his eyes glittering. "The brandy glass, unmarked by liquor. The pistol placed too neatly, the words upon the blotter, half finished, and your cry of protest, too quick, too knowing. Each a thread. Together a noose." Miles staggered, his voice hoarse. "No, you twist it. I only meant—" But Inspector Graves stepped forward grimly. "That'll do, Doctor." "I've heard enough." Miles sank into a chair, his hands trembling, his defiance broken. Poirot drew himself upright, his voice ringing with quiet finality. "So, you see, mes amis, the truth is simple once the lies are stripped away. Sir Reginald was not slain by a jealous wife, nor by a fearful secretary, nor by a desperate barrister. He was murdered by his trusted physician, who thought himself clever enough to deceive. But he forgot one thing. The little grey cells. They do not lie. A hush fell over the library. The clock ticked on. The case was solved. Chapter 11. The Reflection. The storm had passed, though its shadow lingered over Blackwood Hall. Dr. Miles had been led away under Inspector Graves's stern authority, his protest dwindling into silence as the heavy doors closed behind him. The household, shaken and subdued, dispersed slowly into the night, each retreating to private chambers where fear and shame whispered more loudly than comfort. In the library only Poirot, Hastings, and Lady Margaret remained. The fire had burned low, throwing soft embers across the hearth. Hastings sat heavily, still reeling from the revelations of the evening. "Upon my word, Poirot," he said at last, "I should never have suspected Miles. A quiet fellow, respectable, a doctor of all things. One imagines them healers, not blackmailers and murderers." Poirot inclined his head, his expression grave. "Just so, mon ami." "That is the danger. We expect virtue from certain professions, loyalty from certain ties, honesty from certain appearances, but human nature, it does not bend to expectation. It is as it is, flawed, fearful, capable of both nobility and of crime. Lady Margaret, pale but composed, looked at Poirot with wide eyes. "But how did you know, Monsieur Poirot? How could you be so certain?" Poirot's moustaches twitched, a flicker of pride glinting in his gaze. "Because, madame, nothing in life is more revealing than detail." The broken glass, the letter half written, the confusion of a gunshot with a door. To most, these were trifles. To me, they spoke louder than words. Sir Reginald was not a man to end his own life with quiet resignation. He was a man of theatre, of drama. If he died with a confession unspoken, it was because someone ensured he never spoke it. Margaret shivered, and all the while we sat together at table with a murderer. It is dreadful to think on. Poirot's eyes softened. "Yes, madame. Dreadful, but also instructive. You see, crime is rarely the act of a monster. It is most often the act of an ordinary soul driven by fear, by greed, by desperation. Miles was no demon. He was a man who believed his ruin was near, and so chose a path of ruin for another. But in doing so, he sealed his own fate. He rose, straightening his cuffs, his manner once again immaculate, composed. And so, the little grey cells have spoken. Justice will follow in its slow English way. But let us remember this, that truth, though it may stumble behind lies, will always arrive in the end." For a moment silence reigned, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Hastings watched his friend, so small, so precise, yet so unyielding, and marvelled, as ever, at the brilliance of his mind. Poirot turned to the window where the night lay still across the lawns of Blackwood Hall. "It is finished. And now, Hastings, perhaps we may find a quiet inn, a good meal, and a night without shadows. For even the greatest detective," he added with a faint smile, "must occasionally allow himself to rest his little grey cells." Chapter 12. Poirot's quiet exit. The following morning dawned pale and clear, as though the earth itself sought to wash away the gloom of Blackwood Hall. The mist had lifted from the gardens, and the lawns glittered faintly with dew. Yet within the house the air remained heavy. Whispers carried through the corridors, and the servants moved softly as though unwilling to disturb the fragile calm that followed revelation. Inspector Graves had departed at first light with Doctor. Miles in custody. The echo of their departure, the slam of carriage doors, the crunch of wheels upon gravel, seemed to reverberate long after they had gone. Lady Eleanor had retreated to her chamber, pleading exhaustion. Harcourt paced the terrace in solitary silence, his future in the courts uncertain, though his name had been spared disgrace. Poor Miss Green, her eyes swollen from weeping, had been granted leave to rest, though whether she would ever return to her position was doubtful. It was Lady Margaret who sought out Poirot and Hastings in the breakfast-room, where the detective sat savouring his customary chocolate. "Monsieur Poirot," she said gently, "we cannot thank you enough. Without you, we should all have remained in terror, or worse, suspicion might have destroyed us one by one. Yet I cannot help but feel hollow. Justice is done, yes, but there is no triumph in it." Poirot bowed his head slightly, his expression grave. "Madame, you're correct. In murder there is no victory. One life is ended, another ruined, and those who remain are scarred by the shadow. The work of the detective is not to bring joy, but to bring clarity, to reveal the truth so that healing may, in time, begin." Hastings, buttering his toast with unnecessary vigour, looked up. "Well, I must say, Poirot, you've a way of making it sound almost philosophical. But surely it's a satisfaction to see the guilty man unmasked." Poirot's moustaches twitched into the faintest of smiles. "Satisfaction, yes, but never joy. Remember, mon ami, the role of Hercule Poirot is not to gloat, but to restore order from chaos. That is enough." He rose, setting aside his cup with delicate precision. "And now, Hastings, we must take our leave. Blackwood Hall will recover in its own way, but our presence here is no longer required. Already the past begins to close its door." Lady Margaret's eyes softened with gratitude. "You will always be welcome, Monsieur Poirot. For myself, I shall never forget what you have done." Poirot inclined his head with old-world courtesy. Merci, madame, but think rather not of me, but of the lesson. In every human heart there are shadows, but also light. To see clearly one must observe with patience, humility, and reason. That, perhaps, is the true confession at midnight, that truth, however painful, will out. Within the hour, Hastings and Poirot's luggage was brought down by the butler. The motor car waited in the drive, the morning sun glinting upon its polished surface. Hastings cast one last glance at the great grey house, its windows solemn, its ivy-clad walls bearing witness to secrets too dark for stone to carry lightly. Beside him, Poirot adjusted his gloves with meticulous care. "Come, Hastings. There is a small inn by the river where the trout is said to be excellent, and where, I trust, no one shall speak of murder." As the motor car rolled down the long drive and the towers of Blackwood Hall receded into the distance, Hastings felt once more that mingling of awe and relief that always followed such adventures. For wherever Hercule Poirot walked, order triumphed over chaos, and the little grey cells had their quiet, flawless victory.